So first, I want to welcome you here to the desert.
Thank you.
This is a unique place to live and to work. I don't think you could have a more beautiful environment here to talk about a book than in the library and be able to see out the windows. But I don't think I could start without saying how happy we are to see all of you. It's been 2 years since we've all been together. And there's just something special about this year and the excitement for the festival and just being able to be together and talk in person. I've watched many videos over the last 2.5 years of Bonnie, and you're going to love this discussion with her. This is a fabulous book. So what I want to do is first, you're an author. You've written 3 books. She Went to the Field, Women Soldiers of the Civil War. You wrote a book, American Chinatown, A People's History of 5 Neighborhoods. You wrote this book, Why We Swim. You write for the New York Times and other newspapers and magazines. She also wrote a children's book. And I'd be remiss if I didn't show you that. You can buy it out in the bookstore. So if you have grandchildren or kids, or especially granddaughters or daughters, this is a great book. It's called Sarah and the Big Wave, and it's a fabulous book. And so what I want to do is diverge just a little from Why We Swim to ask, how did you get into writing a children's book?
First of all, I want to say thank you so much, Doug, for doing this with me. It's so wonderful to see you here in person. And on this glorious day, and I was flying in yesterday afternoon and looking at all the pools, as you do, and you're just like, I could go in that one and that one and that one, and diving into Sarah and the Big Wave with children's books. I mean, I wrote a magazine story about big wave surfers, female big wave surfers at Mavericks, so preparing to surf this big break in Northern California for the first time in competition, and this was a season of them preparing for this, and this never happens. A children's book editor in New York phoned me up and said, have you ever thought about writing kids' books? And I thought, this is manna from heaven falling to my lap. And this is the result, and it was just such a fun and glorious experience to do.
So what I love about this book is it's talking about these gigantic waves at Maverick, and to give you a feeling of that, they added this one page that folds up so you can see how big the wave is. What a great idea. I don't know who came up with that, but it was brilliant. Okay, so we're here for Why We Swim. And why did you write this book? What inspired you to write a book about swimming?
I think I always have to answer that with the origin story that my parents met in a swimming pool in Hong Kong. And I mean, it kind of doesn't get better than that. And my father was a lifeguard, and my mom was a great swimmer and still is when she does do it. And we kids grew up in New York and Long Island, and we were always at Jones Beach in the ocean, and swam on the swim team, taught swim lessons, were lifeguards ourselves, and in college, I said, you know what, I'm going to try other sports. I rowed crew, I played water polo, a little bit of water polo, and then I thought, I'm doing all of the sports around the water that I just didn't try before, and now I surf. But it always comes back to swimming. It always comes back to that experience of, and I can see all these, everyone here knows what we're talking about, and there's nothing like it, and also swimming is one of those funny activities that it's a survival skill, and also that we humans are unusual amongst terrestrial mammals in that we are not born instinctively knowing how to swim. We have to be taught, and so that's to me, that is so interesting because it's something that we lost along the evolutionary path, right, from emerging from the ocean, and yet, dogs, cats, rats, even bats can swim. I mean, you can see them do all of these things, and we can't, and we have to be taught. And so somehow there is a mythology and a story behind teaching and passing those skills down that I wanted to get into.
So like many here, I mean, I've been around water all my life.
Yeah.
My dad was a lifeguard too for a second job, and that's how I learned how to swim. And I've been in the ocean. I don't consider myself a swimmer because I didn't swim competitive, but I lap swim now. But this isn't just a book about swimming. It's not teaching us the mechanics of doing the breaststroke or
Right.
one of the different strokes. So what is it beyond that that you're trying to communicate?
Well, I think, I mean, I structured the book in thematic ways, talking about survival, well-being, community, competition, and flow. And I feel that those thematic buckets kind of hold a lot. And you know, there's so much around the, you know, how we talk about our bodies and how we talk about, you know, being in a flow state, or we talk about like immersion in things. And there's a language that like our vocabulary kind of betrays our fascination with this element that is we're not native to, but we really yearn for, you know. And there's so many stories around shipwrecks at sea, and so you know, distances swum, and you know, and the essential thing that we return to is that the line between swimming and drowning is pretty porous, you know, and there's a lot of room in there for fear and joy and buoyancy and submersion and just all of these, again, like these, you know, we're fascinated with the deep, like when we fear the deep ocean and when we can't see where we're going, and sharks and all. I mean, the sharks occupy an outsized like space in our brain where the fear is, because, you know, for a reason. And these are very primal emotions and fears that we have.
So when you thought about writing this book, did you have the ending before you started, or what was your process, your investigation? You have a great line. You say, this book is an investigation of what seduces us to water despite its dangers and why we come back again and again. I love that you said it's an investigation and seduces. So again, you know, what was your process to get
Yeah.
where you got, and the division into the 5 sections?
That's a great question. What everyone should know is that it never starts out as neat and organized and lovely as we are talking about today. I mean, it really was several years of you know, trying to figure out, is there a book in this? I mean, I had a great editor at the New York Times, and he said, you know, you should write a book about swimming because you're always writing about swimming. And until he pointed that out to me, I had no idea I was doing that, and I had no idea that I was like wherever I went to report a story that someone I would be seeking out water, and why did I do that? You know, and so much of that kind of writing, those places, exploring the people, that there was such a great response to that, and that started to tell me something about, as I started collecting some material, that maybe this could be a book. So what form does that take? And collecting great stories. First of all, I mean, you can, you know, we were talking in the green room earlier, and we said, you know, like any. You can tell us, you can invite an audience and a reader to go with you anywhere if you tell them a good story. And it, you know, it could be about, I mean, what am I talking about? I'm talking about, you know, archaeological digs in the desert where the first, you know, peoples were living this semi-aquatic life along this paleo lake that dried up, you know, when, but after the Sahara was green. I can take you there. I can try to pretend, you know, I can imagine what that might look like, despite the fact that there's very little, you know, a wake doesn't leave much of a trace behind, but you can see all of the little, you know, fish hooks in the bottom of this like dried out lake bed. I mean, these are the little details that I love, that because I love them, I think, oh, maybe someone else will be really interested in what this little trail, crumb trail leaves behind. And so I feel like that was the kind of thing that I was really after, the sense of wonder, but also like a very wide-ranging exploration of that.
So a lot of times I judge a book by what surprises me and things that I don't know.
Right.
And again, the title was fabulous, but it was a book more about than just swimming. And so there were some facts in there that I wanted to kind of in a rapid session go through. You just talked about one where the first known record of swimming was in the middle of the desert.
Right.
someplace now we would think that there never would have been a place there. And then Benjamin Franklin, something that swimmers use all the time. What did he invent?
Swim paddles. I mean, this guy, truly Renaissance man, also loved to swim nude and swam in the Thames every day that he was posted in London. I mean, all of these, you want to know these things. It just brings these like figures to life that but Ben Franklin, I think just, he had so much to say about swimming too. And he was like, okay, well, what if I invented these? Imagine like painter's palettes. And he was using those and thinking about like how can I propel myself being absent the, webbing, on my hands. Like it's just there are all kinds of things that we've invented over the years to make us better swimmers because we know we want to be better than we are.
And FDR in the first pool in the White House.
That's right. And so and JFK too. Like so all of these presidents. So. You know that FDR suffered from polio, and so he had a pool put into the White House so that he could swim. And JFK also, he suffered from terrible physical ailments, and so he would also go down to the pool. And now it's the room where the White House press pool goes. Isn't that amazing? And there was this, we had this thread on Twitter about that pool, and there were various reporters that chimed in and said, oh yeah, it's underneath the pool is where all of the audiovisual equipment is. Like when you're in the interviews, that's all where it lives. And I just thought like the layers that you excavate to get to those stories is just so fun.
I've practiced Tai Chi for a long time, and later we'll talk about mindfulness and how that relates to water and swimming. But I was fascinated by, in essence, the martial arts that was done in the water in Japan. So maybe you could tell us about that.
So samurai swimming is a phrase that just caught me, and I thought, okay, everyone needs to know about this, and no one does, right? And it's basically the swimming martial art of Japan. And so if you imagine that all of the different samurai clans in the past were protecting so Japan is an archipelago, different bodies of water where you could be the ocean, a river, a lake, and so you had to think of come up with different techniques of handling yourself in the water to protect yourself from, some invasion or some enemy. So it's not, this practice just allowed me to understand all of the different ways that we don't think about swimming in the competitive from a competitive standpoint. We think about competition as the fastest or furthest or longest. And in this case, it's not about speed. It's about imagining how to launch out of still water into a boat. There is a move called the flying mullet, and you can propel yourself out of the water into a boat with this move. Or, right, I would love to be able to do this. You can watch this on YouTube. It's really hard. Or there's, this is an interesting one, the egg beater technique of you think about with synchronized swimming, you're using it to propel yourself and keep your upper body still. And that's what, you think about with synchronized swimming. And there is a description of this kind of technique in samurai swimming texts from hundreds of years ago, because you have to think about how you propel yourself up out of the water, hold your body still, and then shoot an arrow. And remember that an arrow, the feathers have to be dry to fly true. And so or that you have swords and you're fighting, in the water. And so these days, there are competitions now in which this actually, is an annual event where the best samurai swimming practitioners, it's called Nihon Eiho in Japan. So it's basically the Japanese classical swimming arts. And you'll see, imagine in the Palm Desert pool, as we were talking about, a samurai dressed in like 30 pounds of gear swimming silently across that pool. And you're basically prizing different elements of swimming ability and technique that you never thought of. And so that was a really interesting way to get into what else could swimming be. And it's about beauty, it's about grace, it's about being in harmony with the water, and it's not about fighting or martial arts, so to speak. But that's what martial arts practice now is. It's about like this mind-body connectivity and collectiveness, and then in the element of water, add something really special to it.
So we could go on and on about the things that I learned in the book about what's associated with swimming, but I want to kind of go through each of the sections. Why was survival the first section of the book?
It's because it's really what we think of when we think about swimming. Why did humans learn to swim? Why did humans prize this ability and keep passing on the skills over time immemorial? And I opened the book with a story about Gudliger Friðþórsson, who's this Icelandic fisherman who, in 1984, his fishing vessel capsized in the North Atlantic, and he, it's the dead of winter, and everyone else quickly drowned, but he ended up swimming over 6 hours, 6 kilometers in 41-degree water. Made it, followed the lighthouse to his home island, climbed out of the water, and, knocked onto the first house that he saw the lights on. And they took him to the hospital. They couldn't discern his heartbeat, and yet he showed no signs of hypothermia and was only a little bit dehydrated. And to me, this was like a story that like winged its way around the globe, and like newspapers around the world covered this story because like, how did he survive? And it's two things. It's that he was an exceptional swimmer, because all of the, Iceland is a country of fishermen and shipwrecks and drownings, like since always. And so everyone who is a mariner learns to swim and goes to like what they call navigation school. And so he learned to be a great swimmer. But not only that, of course, because his fellow sailors drowned, was that his body was, his fat was more like a seal's than a human's, and it was like 2 or 3 times normal human thickness and more dense. And so it kept his core temperature stable enough that he could keep swimming and survive. And so he was the first person, he kind of underwent a bunch of medical experiments and tests over the next decades, and he, and they found this out about him, and other than that, his driving force to kind of teach people about water safety was because, and he said when they were holding onto the boat's keel before it sank, all of these cases when something like this happens, no one is left to tell. And he said, we were holding onto the keel that night. He said, if any one of us survives, I have to tell. And so what happened was that they were unable to deploy the life raft when the ship started sinking. And this was when self-deploying life rafts were just beginning to be installed on boats. And then it led to it becoming mandatory in all the vessels in the Icelandic fishermen.
And they actually have an annual swim every year.
They have an annual swim called Gudligsund, which is Gudliger's Swim. And it, people in the village swim. And I went to Iceland to participate in the swim. You're swimming 6 kilometers in a pool, but everyone from the local elementary school principal or, sailors, other fishermen who've lost their, colleagues. There's like the local swim team does it, and it's a really beautiful, I think in the book I compare it to like a 4th of July fun run or like a turkey trot, but it's more than that, but it is like this community coming together to honor what this person was able to do and also what that means to that community.
So in your section on community, I think I'd probably taken swimming for granted and didn't really understand the historical aspects, the historical restrictions, but then also how swimming builds communities. So I kind of want to talk about both of those. But first tell us about the Coach Jay in Baghdad. It's another story I'd never heard of. You would have thought that we would have from all that happened there, but tell us about Jay.
Coach Jay actually wrote to me. I mean, I found out about Coach Jay because we became pen pals, and he was a Foreign Service guy posted in Baghdad, and it was, gosh, I think it was like 2008 to 10, something like that, and he was a swimmer. Like, he always was teaching swimming lessons. He grew up in like Baltimore, Maryland, D.C., and he got to Baghdad, and he'd been posted all around the world and doing these on postings. And he, at that time, the Green Zone was at Saddam Hussein's former palace pool, the Republican Palace, and so the pool there. Sorry, it was in the Republican Palace, but they had a pool because Saddam and his two murderous sons were very fond of pools. Every one of their palaces and houses, like I think like close to 90 all over Iraq, had pools. And this pool was like, it had diving boards and lighted fountains and like, marble everything. And they were allowed to use the pool, which you can't, I mean, just think about this, they're repurposing this place as like the center of this hub of activity during wartime. And yet there's this glorious pool. And you feel very strange to go swim in this pool. I mean, he talked about how he started to swim, and people from like translators to helicopter pilots to, diplomats would go. And after a while, people started asking him for tips about swimming. And he started this club, Baghdad Swim Club. And then the Green Zone moved to a more fortified, purpose-built place, and that had a modern, like 25-yard pool, and hundreds of people. I mean, over the few years he was there, it was like 300 people on this roster, from Lebanon, from Mexico, from West Texas. All these people who are just wanting to. You kind of wonder why do some people learn to swim and why do others not? And there's this, oftentimes it comes down to money and just like socioeconomic status. You think about, these people live near the coast in Madagascar. They must know how to swim. This guy who was his colleague in the Foreign Service, Andre, did not know how to swim. He grew up in Madagascar. He said that the first time he had this terrible experience with swimming, never learned, but he really wanted to learn. And then he, over the next months, became the assistant coach to Coach Jay, taught countless more people how to swim, how to be comfortable in the water. And then, I think about this story as like in wartime, I have a friend who's was a Vietnam combat nurse. And she said, during wartime, all you want is the normal things to remind you that you're human. Like, you have dinners, you go swimming, you talk about your kids, you show each other pictures. And in this place, swimming was that. Like, for 1 hour a day when they're having these classes, they're having these lessons, and then, and then you go back to your post. They talked about how everyone in the water, didn't matter if you were the general or the, private. Like, you had equity in the water. That was an equalizing place.
So tell us about the chapter, Who Gets to Swim?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great seg from this idea of water buoying us equally, but not everyone gets access to that water, right? So especially in this country, pools and also beaches were places that were extremely segregated, and Black people and other people of color, but the Black community especially, were forcibly removed or not allowed to enter these waters. And there's a great book I talk about in my book called Contested Waters by Jeff Wiltz that talks about the history of this, this racial segregation of water. So where water should be a place, that is, has equal access, you would think that it would be, you can go swim anywhere, but you need to know how to do it. You need to have someone teach you how to do it. And if you don't have that, it becomes a place that's very unsafe, actually. And we saw actually in the pandemic in New York, for example, on the coastlines, a lot of these beaches did not have a lifeguard presence, but also people were so desperate to, in a hot summer, go to the water that there were a lot of drownings, like more so than, because a lot of pools were closed. And so there's so much to get into. We have 20 minutes left, but it's really, it's been something that I've been talking about a lot in the last few years since Why We Swim came out, and working with communities to talk about these issues of access and education, and also to, have swimming be something that, even if you join I mean, for me, like I joined a swim team when I was 8 years old, 9 years old, and it was in the next town over from where I grew up on Long Island, and it was like a very diverse, it was the first time I was in a space physically where there were bodies of all different types and shades, and I felt that was actually a home for me. I grew up in a very white town, very homogeneous town, and it was, other than like when I would go to Chinatown on the weekends to spend time with my family and extended community, but it was very like a bifurcated experience, and swimming was one of those places that kind of it brought everything together for me, and I think that it shows in this book.
So that's kind of the logical nexus to the part of the book that I liked the best, which was well-being and flow. Mm-hmm. And tell us a little, because I was fascinated by it, and again, it's something I think I took for advantage, and after the book, when I would go swim, I begin to see that there was this kind of well-being and flow aspect to it. So kind of tell us about what your research revealed about the effect of water.
Right.
Being in the water and just being near the water. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think we all have this sense of water being therapeutic, right? I mean, since like the Romans and the Greeks, always the Egyptians, like bathing, you'd plunge into there was like seawater baths and stuff like that, hot then cold and then hot again. What is the thing that makes you feel invigorated and alive? And so there's like this very stimulating quality of immersion that we've all known in some way to feel really good, to make us like it promoting health. And so in many ways, the science is only beginning to catch up to why this is happening. And, you only have to look at the cold plunge fad right now to know, like, ice bath, but this is something that people were doing for a long time. And so one of the things I wanted to know was what happens to your body when it goes into ice water, and also, like, what does it change your body? And so I spent a lot of time at the Dolphin Club in San Francisco, swimming there with a woman named Kim Chambers, who was the first woman to swim from the Farallones to San Francisco.
So that's swimming in the San Francisco Bay.
It's real cold.
It's cold, and it's dark, and there's sea animals,
Yeah.
but it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Sometimes you see them, sometimes you don't. You imagine they're there, and guess what? They're always there. And you just make your peace with that. You're in their living room, and you're a visitor. But that we still go in anyway. Why do we do that? And I remember swimming around there in an aquatic park and asking Kim one morning, I said, do certain bodies do better in cold water? Like, what is, because you would see, like, in the locker room or people walking out to the beach, that everyone, it's a whole range, like, and you're thinking, how does this person stay warm? Some people wear wetsuits, but it's encouraged to just go in your Speedos. And I really wondered what happens to your body, and also do certain bodies stay warmer? And she said, I know that it has something to do with brown fat, but I don't really know too much about that. So then I went to UCSF, which is like 5 miles away, and there's like cutting edge scientists doing studies on longevity and fat, and so brown fat. So this is something that I learned, that we're all born with two kinds of fat. So white fat, we're all very familiar with, stores energy. And brown fat, it creates heat energy. So like a baby doesn't have a lot of muscle tone, can't shiver to generate heat to warm itself up. And if you look at where the deposits of brown fat are, where on a baby, it's kind of like a scarf draped around their neck, keep them warm. And over time, you lose that kind of fat that creates heat energy. And it's very rich in mitochondria, which is really interesting. And so, but there are ways as you are growing older in your body that you can turn your white fat into, you can brown your white fat and turn it into what's called beige fat. Beige fat is basically brown fat, except it didn't start out that way. And they know that there are ways to do that, include exercise, cold exposure, and also, interestingly enough, capsaicin, hot, chili, and
Chili peppers, right?
chili peppers, yeah. So I don't know if there's something where you can like inject yourself with capsaicin and you're swimming in cold water, like you're doing great. You're really creating a lot of brown fat. But I talked to some scientists. Shingo Kajimura was one of them, and it was so fascinating to hear about this. Like, this is what they're finding out right now. It's the kind of beginning days, but they know that these are things that happen. So I said, this is so great. Cold water swimming is totally something that you can do to create more brown fat in your body. And it's like, it revs up your metabolism over time. And so, this is great stuff. This is great evidence that I just thought, like, I did not know this. People will want to know this. And now I read about brown fat everywhere. Everywhere.
So, but tell us too about just the effect on our body and our mind from just being around water. I love your kind of picture in my mind about standing on the beach and smelling the ocean,
Yeah.
hearing the waves, just what that does to us.
Right. It's true that we don't even have to get in and it feels good. We don't, so why do we want to be near it? And it's that we know about, it being in blue and green spaces is something that we respond to as humans. And our brains are, there are things that are evolutionarily we're tuned into. And the cues with water, it's like we listen to water, we see it, and it promotes alpha wave activity, which are the brain waves that are associated with like relaxation and creativity and calm. And so these are, it makes sense. If I see a body of water, a pool or ocean, or like, I want to get in it, but if I can't get in it, just sitting there and taking it in does help me. And I think everyone here knows that to be true. And this is one little slice of like why it's true.
I don't know if this was in the book or if I heard it on one of the interviews, but you talked about left alone with our thoughts, sometimes our best ideas come to us when we're swimming or in the shower. And what was interesting to me is that I was a trial lawyer for a long time, and I used to tell people, my best closing arguments were in the morning in the shower. And I wish that I could have recorded them or written them down. But why do you think that is?
I mean, we probably spend a lot more time in the shower than we should. I mean, we don't. I can I can wash myself in like 60 seconds, but I linger, because it feels so good, the water running down. And I will tell you that when all the pools closed, I spent a lot more time in the shower. My showers got a lot longer. And it's because that sensory, the hush of the sound. I mean, like, think about all those white noise machines. It's like ocean wave setting, or like, for your babies to put them to sleep. It's like, there's crashing waves and, or like rain. These are things that we are hardwired to respond to in very positive ways. And there is that these frequency of sound waves is something that does promote thinking, like creative thinking and connections. And what I love about, I spent a lot of time in the pool thinking when I was writing this book. And I really was trying to follow like the little fish of my mind as it was going from place to place. And what are the connections? I would be thinking about stupid things like, as I'm doing backstroke, like when a bird poops in the pool, where does it go? Hopefully it goes to the gutter. But how many times does the bird poop? But that you're prone to these flights of fancy, and these are the kinds of things that will lead to other things. You won't normally be thinking about these things, but when you are in this environment that allows you to detach and really just like free associate, free connect, flow, these are words that, again, like there's a liquid movement of our thoughts.
So you had another great quote talking about flow. Swimming helps you come out on the other side of a difficult time.
Sure.
What did you mean by that?
I mean, I can think of all of the times that swimming helped me get through, very, very tough times in my life, whether it was through like my parents' divorce or, a miscarriage or a friend's death. And, I went to the water. I went to the water, and it also is a place of life. It's a place of like constant, replenishment and rejuvenation, and you feel refreshed. You wash away sins, you wash away hard things, and I think that there is a quality to that that physically lends to our brains and it's a balm for our minds.
So if you switch to competition, your chapter on competition, we with well-being and flow, it's kind of related to
Yep.
mindfulness.
Sure.
And I never was a competitive swimmer. I mean, I played tennis and did other sports and things like that. And of course, my profession was competitive in that regards. But you talk about they don't rely, at least the sports psychologist you talked to said, some people would have thought you want the swimmers to be able to swim faster because they're not thinking of anything, in a sense, their mindfulness. But he described it another way, that it's mindlessness.
Right, that you get yourself to this point where you've practiced enough that you're not worried about it. You know that your body will do the thing, and you are so you kind of give over your brain to this what your body has already known what to do, and it's almost like we talk in the book. I talk about being in what being in the zone and being in a flow state kind of for me is different. Like, when you're in the zone, you're very focused actually. It's like, many people give the example of like a basketball player. Like, there's like a hypervigilance on that you're like, you have a little bit of a tunnel vision and you focus on your task. But I think swimming is a little bit more, I think you experience both. There's like heightened sense in a competitive state where it's really like this focus, but then there's also a state of which you've practiced so much that you move into a different, like it's almost automatic, and the flow is, you feel like you don't feel an awareness of time passing. You're so at one with that thing that you're doing, you're engaged with it, that there is no division. There is no focus on time expanding. It's just that you have no concept of time. And so I've heard competitors talk about this experience as both of those. But I think we're very related but distinct states of mind, where something is very heightened, you remember everything in it. It's like you could fill this 10 seconds with like what seems to be 10 years of experience. And then also where there is no time. You just feel like the completeness of you being part of this thing that's bigger than you.
Do you remember or have a distinct memory of the first time you got in water swimming?
I don't have a distinct memory of the first time, but I do talk about in the book about being at Jones Beach and having this, early memory of like being in the waves, everyone's standing on the shore, and as the waves are rolling in and you see the swell coming and everyone goes, whoa, and there's something very, you're being with the water, breathing with the ocean. But also I remember getting the distinct memory that I have from that is like the hyper-focused, like 10 years in an instant, is that I got knocked over, ass over tea kettle, and was just like, which way is up? There's like seaweed everywhere, and I remember thinking like, I don't really know how to get up out of this. And it was a moment of terror and yet clarity. And then my cousin was swimming next to me and kicked me, and so I kind of knew where I was, and so I came back up, and I remember pretending that nothing happened, like I was not in danger, because I was embarrassed, but I never forgot that, because it's something that I think about every day when I go out surfing at Ocean Beach in San Francisco, or Pacifica or Bolinas, that there are these terrors and hazards always, but that if you learn how to play nice with it, you can be a part of that for a while,
And I love that in the child's book you talk about that too,
Yeah.
about being knocked under the water and what the character in the book uses to kind of help work through that fear.
Right. The counting, because you always have more breath than you know, and this is something that I do all the time, and I think that that's really I was talking to a group of first and second graders the other day about, what happens when you go underwater and you count and you realize how much breath you have. And this is something that is like, it's taught to big wave surfers, and it's as useful to them as it is to little kids, just to kind of understand how your body, how not to panic,
Because
how to
there's
stay
a real
calm.
fear associated
Oh, yeah.
with water for everyone.
For everyone. And I keep thinking about this when you were telling me last night about, like, I'm not a swimmer. And I'm like, you are a swimmer. But what keeps you from being a swimmer sometimes is allowing yourself to say, like, oh, I can be afraid, but I can also be a swimmer. And that, I think, is a really important. I wanted this book to be for everyone, even for the people who didn't think that they were swimmers, because there's something about, there's so many people who have written to me and said, I never thought I could be a swimmer. And then I did it. I found someone to teach me, I found a pool, I found a regular community, and now I am someone who I never thought I'd get to be. And I think that is, when you, especially as an adult, to be brave enough to make that leap that is a really profound thing to be able to do.
And was that kind of your theme then? What would be the takeaway you would want from people after they read this book?
I think that the water is for all of us, and that there are barriers to entry, but that you can jump over them. You really can.
And it must have made you feel good, because you told me about receiving letters from
Yeah.
people who read this book and how it impacted them. Tell us a little bit about that.
I mean, my book came out during lockdown when no one could swim. This is not something that one thinks of as the ideal environment in which to push out a book about swimming and say, like, hey, let's all get in. And yet, I think it was an opportunity, like for many other things that we missed so desperately, and began to understand why they were so important to us. And so people had a chance to think about what swimming does for them on a daily basis when they didn't have it anymore. And then people then also could take to open waters near them if they were lucky enough to be able to, like in the Bay Area, the beaches were never closed, and so people started swimming in the bay. I mean, I have so many friends who are on my master's team who started swimming in the bay, and they were always screaming at me, I'm never gonna do it, I'm just a pool swimmer. And then they would send me pictures of like them swimming and with their wetsuits and the bridges and the beautiful, some seaweed and some just
And seals.
and seal. I mean, just that this is and it's wild, and it's not that they're not scared. It's not that it wasn't scary to do or doesn't continue to be so, but that they did it, and they were like little kids. I mean, isn't this amazing that this is something that can return you to that state of glee? Like I always see people who are not kids in the pool or at the beach or in a lake doing kid things, cannonballing. I met this guy recently, I don't know if you've heard of him, he's called the Great Lake Jumper. This guy, Dan O'Connor, who basically since June of 2020 has been jumping into Lake Michigan every single day, even in the winter. Yeah, he's hilarious, and he will jump. I mean, he'll do can openers, and he'll do cannonballs, and he'll do these flips. And then on day 365, Jeff Tweedy of Wilco went and played music for him as he jumped off this lifeguard tower into, over his head, and he keeps going. I mean, this is 3 years on, almost 3 years on that he's doing this. And it's for nothing more than the joy of doing it, the plunge, the jumping certainly is something that, actually I'm interviewing him for my new book, which I know you wanted to talk about a little bit.
I want it, we just have 2 minutes,
Yeah.
and so we don't have too much time for questions, but go ahead. So tell me the question, and I'm going to repeat it.
Okay. My question is to please have her give her thoughts about the meditative quality. It's a little bit different than the flow
Sure.
in the zone. When I swim laps, I tend to, people sit and meditate. That's not my meditation, it's the swimming,
Right.
and it's quite wonderful.
So the question is to talk about the meditative aspects of swimming.
Well, this is a story that I was telling Doug yesterday, but a woman I spoke to told me that she stopped doing yoga after she started swimming, her swimming practice, because and she told her yoga instructor, swimming is my moving meditation. I don't need to do yoga anymore because I get what I need in this state. And I mean, you just, especially in a pool, right? I think in a pool, there's like a, there's this, it's a known quantity and quality that, and you just keep going. And so you're able to let go of any of the fears of being in open water, say, and because there's a hyper awareness there that you need to do. But that when you're swimming in a pool, your body is on autopilot, so you can see like the light playing across the lanes, or you notice that someone is, doing a particular pace next to you, and you want to go faster. But you're really like I know that you're. I'm just gonna go a little faster. Do my foot turn a little faster. It's you're not thinking about yourself. You're outside of yourself. Your consciousness is in that water, and I think that's a very valuable practice to have. That you're not the center of everything suddenly. Your consciousness is part of something else.
So that was really good because we're down to 1 second. Thank you very much. You're wonderful. And
Thank you.
the book is wonderful. And please go buy it. And she'll be out there to sign a book if you buy one. Thank you very much. Thanks, Vaughn.